Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we'll talk about some big redistricting news in Louisiana, an attempted congressional handoff in Florida, and answer listener questions about races all around the country in our first ever Mailbag episode. And we'll have help from Leah Askarinam of the Associated Press. Buckle up. I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan analysis for the last 40 years. And I've been researching hiking trails in Oregon's 3rd District near Mount Hood for my son's 13th birthday.
I'm Jacob Rubashkin, deputy editor of Inside Elections. And this past week, I was in Maryland's 8th District with my family for our Passover Seders.
And Leah, I feel like you're not even a guest anymore. You're family. I feel like maybe you should almost introduce yourself.
My name's Leah, and I live very close to where Nathan lives, actually. I live like 2 blocks away from Nathan.
And we didn't want to be in the same room, so that's why we're doing this remote, though. We're working on that. But not in a congressional district, right?
Nope. Just the regular old capital of the United States. That's all.
That's right. Well, we appreciate you coming back and joining us for this discussion.
Happy to be here.
Before we get to our mailbag, Jacob, what is a big piece of news that we shouldn't miss?
We got an update in the Louisiana redistricting saga. For those of you who aren't following this every day, right, the Supreme Court ruled in a case in Alabama that was a racial discrimination gerrymandering case that basically ruled that a state like Alabama that had 7 congressional districts and a population that was a third African American couldn't get by with having just one of 7 districts be majority black. And the court ruled against Alabama, and Louisiana found themselves in a similar position. And so the court also ruled against Louisiana, made them draw a new congressional map that had not 1, but 2 majority black congressional districts. So that's the map we've been working with for the last couple of months. It should net Democrats a second seat in Louisiana and spell the end of the career for Congressman Garrett Graves, a Republican. However, there was a suit filed by self-described non-African American voters who basically said the state had engaged in racial gerrymandering by drawing this new majority black district, which, in fairness, significantly resembles a district that was drawn in the 1990s that was struck down by the Supreme Court as a racial gerrymander, basically a slash across the state all the way from Shreveport to Baton Rouge. So the Fifth Circuit, a 3-judge panel with 2 Trump appointees in the majority, ruled against the map, said that it's a racial gerrymander. This is going to get appealed to the Supreme Court by both the state of Louisiana and the original plaintiffs. So a lot is up in the air, and we'll have to see where the court comes down ultimately before making a ratings change or something like that. But I do think it increases the likelihood that we could get another map in Louisiana ahead of the 2026 cycle. I think that's a real possibility. And while Garrett Graves got the short end of the stick this time around, you could probably draw a much more compact map with 2 black seats that would instead kick Julie Letlow out of Congress next time.
Right. And some of the discussion about this is that potentially Republicans drew this district knowing that it was going to get struck down or wanting it to be struck down. Right. I mean, that's the part of the argument.
Yeah. Or that they drew it to get rid of Garrett Graves.
So, and functionally, again, if the new map, the map that endangered Graves doesn't hold up, then this would help Republicans maintain their House majority this fall. Is kind of the impact of it.
Provided that they go back to a map with only one majority black seat. They might have to redraw another map that still benefits Democrats, but we'll see. Who knows?
Can I ask a question about this?
Sure.
What maps will be used in November of this year, considering it's getting pretty close to down to the wire for, qualifying for running for new lines that don't exist yet?
Yeah, if you figure that out, let me know. The court did not make that clear. They simply said that this map was unconstitutional. They did not. The problem is, right, as far as I'm aware, the old map is still also unconstitutional because a different court had struck that map down. So ostensibly, there's no map right now. And, there's a little bit of wiggle room because it is Louisiana, so they don't actually have primaries. Their filing deadline is significantly later than any other state because everyone goes on the same ballot in November, and then they do that runoff a couple weeks later if no one hits a majority. But no, it is not obvious right now. If you were to ask me, what is the congressional district map in Louisiana today, in this very moment, as it pertains to November, the answer is there isn't one. I think the most likely outcome is the Supreme Court steps in and says, no, we're going to use the map that we had, and then maybe we'll settle this after the election. But I think it's up in the air.
I'm just envisioning Googling Louisiana's congressional districts, and there being nothing. It's just a blank. It's just a shape. It's just the boot. That's it. Leah, what's some news that folks shouldn't miss?
The saga of New Hampshire's Democratic primary concluded with a whimper this week. You may have missed it. But if you remember earlier in the cycle, there was some conflict between the DNC and the state Democratic Party in New Hampshire about when the primary would take place, moving New Hampshire from the first in the nation and replacing it with South Carolina. Obviously, that didn't happen without a hitch. There was still an unofficial, unsanctioned DNC write-in primary. Plus, we did have some Democrats on the ballot. It was a bit of a mess. But this weekend, there was a primary in New Hampshire on Saturday that a few Democrats had heard about, or there was no public notice of it. There had been an email sent to some state committee members that we know of, but nothing that was easily accessible. And the DNC voted a couple nights ago to not only reinstate New Hampshire, all of its delegates, because the punishment for not following the rules was you lose delegates. That's how the DNC kind of punishes rule breakers. New Hampshire got all of its delegates and got an extra 2 bonus delegates for holding it in April. It's a bonus month for primaries. So New Hampshire has ended this saga with the DNC. They are ready to move on and work together to elect Joe Biden, they say.
This sounds like a bad press. It sounds like when I'm trying to discipline my kids, like if you break the rules, you get bonus delegates. You get more. I don't know. I'm not sure, but it is strange though. In reading your story, and we'll link to your story in the chatter, that I feel like it was more secretive than what you even described here live on the podcast. It was not many people knew. Is the bottom. This was kind of a secretive thing.
No, and we still don't know how many people actually voted because the state has not released. They've released the delegate results, but not the actual vote that took place at St. Anselm College on Saturday morning.
Of poll fame.
Yeah, St. Anselm College is it?
Oh yeah, it's a cool spot. You should head over there sometime.
Well, speaking of shenanigans, which is my word, I will take responsibility for that. In Florida, Republican Congressman Bill Posey announced he's not running for re-election, but it's a little more complicated than that. He filed to run back on April 9th, but then dropped out right after the filing deadline. The wrinkle to this is that he appeared to give his friend, former state Senate President Mike Herodopoulos, a heads up because Mike Herodopoulos filed for this election an hour before the filing deadline. So essentially, you have a congressman trying to hand off his seat to someone else, to his preferred successor. And you say, well, how did that, or why did that happen? If Posey had announced he was not running for re-election earlier, it would have been an open seat, and you would have seen probably multiple Republicans jump into the race, and it'd be a crowded primary. But because he filed to run for re-election, not many people want to take on an incumbent, and it's difficult to defeat an incumbent in a primary. And so that's why this is a little. It's just I will call it undemocratic with a small d. There are some states that have rules to prevent this sort of thing from happening. Nebraska, California, Missouri, because this is not the first time that someone has done or tried to do this. But Florida doesn't have those rules. This district includes Cape Canaveral. Trump got 58%, so the Republican primary is the most important race or situation here. And so I don't know. It just doesn't sit well with me. But this is unfortunately not the only time that this has happened.
And this is something that people like who are watching races closely across the country watch out for, right? Like, are you going to wait till the last possible second to retire so that your best friend's kid, your cousin, your nephew, whatever, enters without real competition? So it happens.
Yeah.
I mean, the famous example of Dan Lipinski, right? To make this bipartisan,
Sure.
Dan Lipinski in the Chicago suburbs got his seat. I think that was even his father held the seat, and it was after the filing deadline. I think it was like his father was the nominee, and he dropped out, and the party bosses had a mechanism to just kind of slot the son into the father's position.
Yeah. When people are taking advantage of the rules, it's not great, but it is part of the process, at least in Florida and other states right now.
Yeah. Sons should win their primaries the normal way by clearing the field of challengers and cashing in on their last name.
Exactly. Use your father's money to clear the field like a real democratic
exactly
politician.
That's right. Well, if we haven't gotten everyone jaded and tuned off, let's move on. And now it's time for our first ever mailbag. We got a bunch of questions from Twitter/X. We got some email. No one responded to my plea on LinkedIn, but that's okay. I won't take it personally. So we're going to let you, our loyal listeners, guide our conversation this episode. Let's jump right in. I love this one because it's so specific that is what we're trying to do here. This one is from Jack Eichholz. He's a poli-sci doctoral student at GW with roots in Iowa. And his question is, do any repeat challengers from 2022 look to be in a stronger position in 2024? Specifically, Christina Bohannon against Marionette Miller Meeks, my home district in Iowa's 1st district. Jacob, I feel like this is a good first one for you.
Yeah, so we see a lot of candidates on both sides of the aisle coming back for rematches from last time. Our colleague Brad Washer actually wrote a story in January about this trend. I think he pinpointed 28 Democrats and Republicans who had lost races last time who were back for 2024. You can read that story on our website. The number of eventual nominees out of that crowd is going to be a bit smaller because there are some perennial candidates and folks who are in competitive primaries who will not be the nominee again. Just thinking about like Shemaine Daniels in Pennsylvania's 10th district was the nominee last time. She lost her primary this past Tuesday in Pennsylvania, so she falls off the board. But there are a number of Democrats and Republicans in top tier races that are headed for rematches. So, look, I think that there are a number of reasons why candidates might be stronger on their second run for office. It takes a lot to stand up a congressional campaign. You have to do a lot of work. You have to develop a donor network. There are things you have to learn about being a candidate, how to talk to the press, how to do debates, how to connect with voters on the campaign trail, how to raise money. And oftentimes it takes more than one cycle to build that kind of full package. And that's setting aside any sort of questions about the political environment. So, look, I think we see, the Bohannon race, obviously got to mention. She is a great example of a candidate who, ran for the first time last time against Marionette Miller Meeks in that district in Iowa's kind of southeastern corner. And she's back for a second run. And her fundraising, if I'm not mistaken, is she's already raised more money through the first 3 months of the year, and obviously all of last year, than she had over her entire campaign in 2022. I mean, she has really just kind of turned on the jets in a way that is going to put her in a stronger position than last cycle. A guy like Will Rollins in California's 41st district, who ran a pretty well-regarded campaign against Ken Calvert last time, he's getting a much closer look from Democratic strategists in D.C., from national groups, because of his profile, of the profile of the district. He is not a candidate that we really gave any chance to last cycle, but we now see that and we were right. He didn't win. He lost by like 7 points. But this cycle, I think we have that race rated tilt Republican. So definitely one that we anticipate to be much more competitive. And you can kind of go down the list. I do recommend you read Bradley's article. But I think there are a lot of reasons why a repeat candidate has optimism, has reasons for optimism in a rematch. I think that the flip side there is like sometimes a candidate can get lucky on their first go around and they can either catch a little fire or they can surprise their opponent. So the two guys I'm thinking of here, are probably Adam Frisch in Colorado's 3rd district and Carl Marlinga in Michigan's 10th district. Both of those were ultimately very, very close races. Both of them are Democrats. Neither Democrats nor Republicans really anticipated those races to be close, and they were. I don't know if they're going to be as close this time because people are paying attention.
Yeah, and the question, and you mentioned it at the beginning of your answer about the presidential overlay or the presidential cycle, right? There's some optimism on the Democratic side that their candidates, including repeat candidates in California and New York, are going to benefit from presidential turnout, more Democrats, rather than the maybe suppressed turnout from the midterm elections when they had governors at the top of the ticket that weren't running as strong a campaigns as what they had hoped.
Yeah.
One just peeking behind the curtain moment, if I can give away state secrets here. But I happen to know that when Nathan and Jacob interview candidates, one of the things or Nathan from way back when used to ask is, what lessons did you learn from last cycle if it was a second time candidate? And you can glean a lot from that response if it's just well, I'm the same. That's usually not great. But I think one of the more compelling answers that we've heard, or we heard back in the day, was, last cycle I was able to introduce myself, and this cycle I have finances to, go negative. which I couldn't do last cycle, or some sort of kind of key takeaway that indicates it's not just going to be a change of environment. There is some change or addition in strategy that could make this race different from the last one.
Yep, absolutely. Let's and actually we've been talking about money. Let's jump to the next question. This question is from Speedster Max, who was apparently on his from Twitter, a UNL student. I'm going to admit I'm not exactly sure. I tried to peg it as University of Nebraska at Lincoln, but I don't know if you all know what is University of North Louisiana. Is that a? I'm not sure if that's a school or not. But anyway, his question is, how do you use money when handicapping elections? I'll start on this one. That part of it, I think, first of all, is there's almost a minimal threshold, I think, for candidates, and that varies from House and Senate. And it's not even a specific number, but it's almost a smell test. Like if you're raising, at the beginning of a cycle, if you're a House candidate, you're raising less than $100,000. Like you have to. There's some work that needs to be done there. Just some viability for the Senate. It would be higher. And then I think one of the key things is the comparison. Is how does a fundraise, is someone just breaking away from the field in fundraising, or is everyone grouped together, is another factor in, I think, as we look at these elections. But those are the first two that come to mind. What else? You two have been handicapping elections for a long time as well.
Well, putting back on I'm not handicapping elections now, but putting on that hat for a moment, the way I usually describe it is having a lot of money is necessary, but not sufficient. When you need it in order to gain any traction, but once you're kind of in the game in terms of having enough money, a lot of other things come into play. And I will say that in House races, especially in House races that aren't taking place in like major cities with super expensive media markets, there is a point at which like there's only so much money you can spend in Kentucky. What was it? The Kentucky 6th district with the Amy McGrath race way back when.
Oh, right.
Like
Yeah.
there's only so much you can do with it after a while, and that's not really the case with most Senate races or kind of more high profile statewide races.
Yeah, and usually, right, House candidate, the problem is not having enough money, right? It's few have the luxury of, oh dear, I have too much money to spend. What am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
It happens though. It happens.
It does. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that you probably hit a diminishing kind of marginal return at a certain point with money. I think if there are some races where it's like this candidate is spending so much money that it's like, if it's not working, then there's something really wrong. I don't know. The race I think about a lot is it was Texas's, oh gosh, I'm blanking on what district it was then. I guess the 22nd, where Congressman Troy Nehls now is the incumbent there. But in 2020, there was a primary between the Republican primary between Troy Nehls, who was, I believe, the Fort Bend sheriff at the time, and then a very wealthy donor named Kathleen Wall, who spent, I want to say, $9 million, mostly of her own money, on what I think most Republicans would agree was an abysmal campaign. I mean, truly just like was not doing the basic things she needed. And she lost the primary. I mean, she lost the runoff by like 30, 40 points, something like that. So I think their money is important, but it's not kind of the be all end all, right? Like you said, Leah, it's not sufficient. You still have to have something to sell.
Yeah, and the last two things before maybe Leah, I'll let you reach into the mailbag to ask one, but we like to, when candidates are spending a lot of money, we also do tend to look at burn rate, because sometimes they are spending a lot of money either through direct mail or or through email lists in order to raise that money. So it's not going to the money that they have raised is not going to voter contact that Jacob is talking about. And also it's good to see a progression that their fundraising is getting better over the cycle, right? That they are improving. What other pieces? Also, if they have personal money, some candidates will write checks in order to boost their cash on hand numbers at the end of the quarter, but really not have any intention of spending it. They just know that as reporters, we're going to look at those cash on hand numbers and maybe not look a little bit deeper. So there are ways when we're looking at fundraising with handicapping, there are things we have to do a little couple extra steps to see, all right, is this really the true amount of money that this candidate has to spend on a campaign?
Yeah, I mean the one that comes to mind, Nathan, when you say that is Mayra Flores in Texas's 34th district, who's a former congresswoman. She's running again, Republican, kind of has a bit of a national profile. I believe she was the first Mexican immigrant to be elected as a Republican to Congress. I
It's very
believe that's the
specific, but
case.
it sounds right.
But because she got in before Siscomani, but she is one of the top Republican fundraisers, but she also spends a ton of money to raise money. I mean, she's raised $3 million so far, but she's spent 2.2 million. And every quarter the Republicans kind of say, wow, Mayra Flores, did you see how much Mayra Flores outraised Vicente Gonzales by in this district? And it's like, yeah, sure, but she also outspent him by a bajillion too. And so if you look at the cash on hand, the picture is quite different. She's got 786,000. She's raised twice as much money as him overall and has half as much money in the bank as of March 31st. So there's a balance.
Yeah. Okay, let's keep going.
All right, I'm gonna choose a question from the group. This is one that actually I'm curious about. I think it's from Doug Skalka. Doug asks, please share your thoughts on the New York 19 race. Will it be a rematch of the 2022 race? Seems like a balanced district with a bunch of college towns. Could the student populations affect the race? And for context, New York 19, that's Mark Molinaro, and you all have the race rated as tilt Republican, so slightly in his favor.
Jacob, you are New York. You go first.
So interesting district. New York's 19th, kind of starts in the Hudson Valley and extends over into the southern tier. It's going to be a rematch between Molinaro and Josh Riley, who's the Democrat who lost this district narrowly in 2022. He's an attorney. He's got some personal money. He's worked in Democratic politics a bit. You know, I think what Doug is probably asking about here has a lot to do with Tompkins County, which is at the very western end of the district. I have a good authority. Doug might be a graduate of my alma mater, Cornell University. And Cornell and Ithaca College and TC3, Tompkins County Community College, are kind of the three colleges that make up the bedrock of the Tompkins County education scene, and are part of the reason why it is so intensely Democratic. The answer here, I think, is that the student populations and more broadly, kind of the college towns, are incredibly important, but we saw in 2022 they're not sufficient to get a Democrat over the finish line in this district. They are absolutely the engine of victory for any Democrat who wants to win. Josh Riley won Tompkins County by 40 points almost, a raw vote margin of, if my math is right here, 16,000 votes. And I think he lost overall the district by like 5,000, something like that. So absolutely a very strong performance in Tompkins County is integral to a Democratic path to victory in the district. The problem is that I think Democrats are probably tapped out of votes in Tompkins County. If you look at how Josh Riley did, how Kathy Hochul did, how Joe Biden did in 2020, you will see that they all basically did the exact same in Tompkins County, even though they did differently in the district as a whole. So Joe Biden won this seat by 4 points. Kathy Hochul lost it by 7 points, but they both did pretty much exactly the same in Tompkins County, which just kind of means that the votes the Democrats are going to get there are the votes they're going to get, and if they want to get over the finish line, they have to do it elsewhere. They have to do it in the more rural parts of the district. And so that will be Josh Riley's challenge. If he's bleeding student votes, if he's bleeding votes from, faculty and people who are in the college universe, that's going to make it even more challenging, because he already got all the votes he was going to get from them last time, and he still wasn't able to win.
And probably for a future episode, I mean, this brings up what will the status of college campuses be next fall when this election is happening? What is the status of young voters and their relationship with President Biden, who's going to be at the top of the ticket? That is going to be, I think it's a huge unknown that we really don't know what that's going to look like. Here's a great question from our friend Kirk Beto, the editor of National Journal's Hotline. His question is, who's going to win? That's a great Kirk. That's very Leah, who's going to win?
Okay, I was joking when I said I would answer that question.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the Celtics, they look like they have what it takes this year. They're running pretty well. I don't know if they have what it takes to win the whole thing. I don't know if Kirk, is that what you're asking? But
I've got a lot riding on Denver, so I'm going to have to disagree with you there.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go with Gryffindor. I'm just gonna.
Yeah, there we go. I'm sure that's what it is. No, actually, Kirk did have a second question that it says, if you could know the results of one state today, which would it be and why?
I've been thinking about this.
That's good. I'm glad you're here.
I know what I would go with. Presuming that we get all the results.
To share it? No.
Should we all say it at the same time?
Do we each have one?
We'll say on 3.
Okay.
All right.
Let's do it.
1, 2, Michigan.
Ohio.
What are you even 3?
On 3. All right. Go Leah, go first.
No, I was between Michigan and Pennsylvania.
Okay. Jacob,
what are you?
I said Ohio.
Whoa.
Well, so because Kirk gave me some leeway in this question, which is I'm taking this to mean know all the results. So I get the presidential, I get the Senate, and I get the House races. And I think that the Senate tells me who's going to win the Senate, because I think if Sherrod Brown is winning, we'll see what the margin is. But I think that's a good sign for Democrats with their very narrow path to keeping the Senate. If Trump is winning by double digits, I think that's bad news for Joe Biden. If Trump's margin is around where it was in 2020 or less than that, even, I think that means Biden has regained some strength. And then, there's the 13th district, which is one of the swingiest House districts in the country. I think if Republicans are winning that seat back, they've won back the majority, or they've kept their majority, probably expanded it. If Democrats are holding that seat and holding Ohio's 9th district, which is the other potential pickup opportunity, I think that's a good sign for them in the House.
Yeah. Somewhat similarly, that's why I chose Michigan, because of the up and down the ballot presidential race. Probably a must win for Biden, particularly if he's not going to win Arizona, Georgia, and maybe Nevada again. He has to win Michigan. With the open Senate race, where Democrats are defending Senator Debbie Stabenow is not running for re-election. Democrats have to win that Senate race and all the other Senate races, not named West Virginia. And then 2 open Democratic House seats that Democrats have to hold: Slotkin's open seat and Congressman Kilday's open seat. So that's similar reasoning on for me on, but just Michigan.
Yeah.
So I think part of the reason I chose Pennsylvania is because I'm not sure how much House results. I mean, obviously there will be a correlation between House results and presidential results, but I don't know if they're necessarily going to line up in a way that makes looking at House results the best measure of what the presidential results are. So Pennsylvania got a good survey of different populations there. Can look at Pittsburgh, can look at rural areas, can look at suburban Republican areas, and kind of figure out where demographics across the country or where demographics across the state have gone, and from there can probably piece together where the rest of the country has gone.
I've got one, Nathan, for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
This one comes from Nathaniel Rakich of 538, formerly of Inside Elections. Or maybe back then it was still Rothenberg Gonzales Political Report.
It was not.
It was not.
We're not that old.
Wasn't that long ago, but yeah, I have a hard time putting together the timeline.
Don't quote the ancient magic at me. I was there when it was written. So this comes from Nathaniel Rakich, a recent former colleague of some of the people in this podcast, and he asks, how do you square the fact that the general conventional wisdom seems to be that Democrats are favored in the House versus the fact that you guys have more seats, at least tilting toward Republicans, than Democrats? Is everyone else wrong?
Yeah, explain that.
Yeah. Well, this is going to come as a shock. I trust our ratings more than others. I mean, I'm sort of surprised because I have heard this. People have asked us in a similar way at events that groups I've spoken to or something, where say, well, Democrats are sure to win the House, or they're sure bets. I'm like, I don't know who's saying. I mean, we're certainly not, based on either in the narrative or the things that we write or our individual districts, as what Nathaniel was pointing out. I think the path is easier, and I've written that the path is easier for Republicans, and that's by looking at if you look at all the races and how we have them rated, Democrats need to win 9 of our 10 toss-up races to get to the majority. Republicans need to win 2 of 10. So to me, that shows that certainly Democrats aren't favored to win the House right now. So I guess I'm not going to be held responsible for what conventional wisdom says. It feels weird because I think sometimes we are accused of trying to manipulate conventional wisdom, but I don't know if we're not in line with it. I trust what we do. I trust the process in what we do.
What does manipulate conventional wisdom mean? You mean like say things that are true even if they're not popular? Like, what is that? What is that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some of this is online versus maybe in real life, but I don't know. Jacob, Jacob, you're actively a part of our rating process now. Leah, you have been a part of our rating process.
I want to hear Jacob's excuse for this one.
I think it boils down to 2 very straightforward things. The first is that Biden is very unpopular. He is struggling in this presidential race, and there's a very good chance that he will lose and that he will underperform his margin from 2020 pretty much everywhere, with a few exceptions. And we know that presidential performance and House performance are more correlated than they ever have been before. So if Biden does really poorly, Democrats are going to struggle. It's not impossible. It's not impossible to all the Democrats out there listening who are going to give me grief about this, but we know that it's harder to dig yourself out of a hole set by the presidential than it is if the presidential party is winning at the top of the ticket. So that's item number 1. Item number 2 is that Republicans have the majority right now, and so they've got a lot of incumbents in the most difficult races that they can rely on, and we know that incumbency comes with strengths. And we know from last cycle that it's very difficult to defeat an incumbent. I mean, we saw 9 incumbents defeated in general elections last time compared to a historical average of 29, right? 1/3 of the number that we typically see to lose general elections, and a lot of those were kind of redistricting cases. I mean, just kind of looking at the list: Tom O'Halloran, Al Lawson, Tom Malinowski, Sean Patrick Maloney. 4 of the 6 Democrats who lost their races were put in districts that were more difficult after redistricting, and then all 3 Republicans who lost their general elections, Yvette Harrell, Steve Chabot, and Myra Flores, were all put in districts that were more difficult than the ones they were initially elected to. So it is tough to beat an incumbent these days. And so simply by virtue of having more incumbents, that gives Republicans an edge. And then we aren't seeing the kind of departures from competitive seats on the Republican side that give Democrats freebies, right? I don't actually think that there are any. The only Republican who is not running in a seat that we think of as like highly competitive actually made that seat less competitive, and that's Lauren Boebert in Colorado's 3rd district. By not running in that seat, she made life easier for Republicans. But we're not seeing like Brian Fitzpatrick isn't hanging up the cleats and ceding that seat to Democrats. We're not seeing those kind of gimmies for Democrats this cycle.
Yeah.
What I like about the House ratings, like the way that Inside Elections does House ratings, is that it's based on individual congressional districts level votes, not a national popular vote. That is not how the House is decided. And so while you might not have like you're not, the ratings aren't saying there's a 50-50 chance or there's a 49-51% chance of the majority flipping. It's saying these are the seats that would flip in a particular direction or could flip in either direction in this coming year. And we generally see that those races break kind of in a similar trend. So the number of competitive districts that are Democratic and Republican is important, but it's definitely not the end all be all to explain what the actual outcome of the majority will be.
Yeah. We probably have time for one more, and it would be fitting maybe that we end on a very specific type question. And we appear to have a lot of love from the Skalka family for this podcast. This is from Abby Skalka. What percentage of American astronauts, like the ones who actually went into orbit, went on to become politicians? That's very specific. I feel like, Jacob, this is for you.
Yeah, I need to answer this question, or I'm going to have trouble later. What percentage of American astronauts went on to become politicians? So I went and I pulled the numbers, and there have been 379 American astronauts. I'm not actually sure how many of those went into I think that may be the number that actually went into space, but rough numbers, kind of 379 astronauts that are Americans. Yeah, that is space travelers. So that's our denominator. Our numerator is the 4 astronauts who have been elected to federal office. So that is John Glenn, the former senator from Ohio, who tried 3 times. I didn't realize that he had tried 3 times to get elected to the Senate. It's like no wonder he couldn't become president if it took him that long. Harrison Schmidt from New Mexico, also a senator who loses to Jack Bingaman for re-election, or Jeff Bingaman. Jack Swigert, who I believe was from Colorado, is that right? Who wins an election to the House but dies before he can take office. And then most recently, Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona. So it's about 1.05%, I think, is the number of Americans who have been to space who go on to become at least members of Congress or get elected to Congress, which I think is.
What about Nelson?
So here's the thing about our friend Bill Nelson.
Bill Nelson, famously a senator astronaut, Senator Dash astronaut.
So Bill Nelson would tell you that he is an astronaut.
Would he?
And I'm sure he would. I'm
No,
sure.
I know he would. He definitely would.
And in fairness, he is now the administrator of NASA. So like he can say what he wants. Bill Nelson was not an astronaut. Bill Nelson went to space as a member of Congress. But he was not actually an astronaut. I think that's an important distinction. And quite frankly, he wasn't even the first guy to do it. Jake Garn, who was a senator from Utah, went to space as a member of Congress in the 80s. He did it a full decade before Bill Nelson did. And nobody, nobody talks about poor Jake Garn. So yes, the number of members of Congress who have been to space is slightly higher, but the number of astronauts who have been elected to Congress is a little lower.
Wow. And I hope you're ready to defend yourself from the Nelson
from the Nelson bros.
The Nelson bros.
And for triggering Republicans, as you talked about Nelson as an astronaut. And I was disappointed. Jose Hernandez, a former astronaut who ran for Congress in California unsuccessfully, in the movie about him and his path to space, I believe it's called A Million Miles Away. I was disappointed that it did not include his interview with the Rothenberg Political Report as he ran for Congress. That did not make the cut. But that is all the time we have. I apologize. Thank you for the questions that you submitted. I feel like we're going to do this again. And so we'll get to some of the ones that we didn't get to this time, and we'll have some new ones. But let's move on. And finally, our Look What I Found segment, where we talk about anything, literally anything that has interested us in recently. Jacob, but Leah, why don't you go first?
Eric Larson is coming out with a new book about the Civil War. I recently read Deadweight, which is my favorite of his books. Didn't realize it would be my favorite of his books, but highly recommend it. It's about the United States' entrance into World War I. Now we have one about the United States' entrance into Civil War. So excited about that.
Sounds like it might be a bedtime reading story for my boys. We'll
Absolutely.
Jacob, what'd you find?
So I have been watching the FX show Shogun, and I've been really enjoying it. It's been like a good kind of replacement for the like big sweeping historical dramas that, I think people got their fix from like Game of Thrones, obviously not historical, but like similarly warring clans. And it's just a really gorgeously done show. I never read the book, but I probably will now go back and read the novel that it's based on once I finish the series, but would highly recommend anyone who's looking for a new show to pick up on. It's a good one.
Probably not kid friendly though.
Probably not, but again, I don't know if the entrance into the Civil War is bedtime reading. I think they might be ready for Shogun. I don't know. You're the parent, not me. Probably fortunately so. But maybe in a couple of years you can put it on the list.
Well, I found that India has a professional baseball team, and it's interesting to me. The Mumbai Cobras, part of the front office are former Cincinnati Reds Chris Sabo and Barry Larkin. But it's really interesting to me because one of the players on the Mumbai Cobras is a kid named Dalton Combs. Now, Dalton Combs went to the same high school in Indiana, Adams Central, that my father-in-law went to. He then went on to go to Huntington University, where my wife went to, my sister-in-law, her sister, my sister-in-law, and her husband. And my brother-in-law is from India. So I'm like, this is great. So basically this means that I have a tab open on my computer to buy Mumbai Cobras merch in order to support this team, because it's too crazy. And it gets even crazier that when Dalton Combs was in the minor leagues in the Giants system, he was playing in a minor league team that was, I'll say, probably 20 miles from my parents' house in Oregon. It was the Salem Kaiser Volcanoes. And I took the boys to see him play there. So anyway, it's just crazy. So for some reason, I am very excited about India and Dalton Combs playing for the Mumbai Cobras.
maybe a stupid question, but if this is the first professional baseball team in India, who do they play against? Are they like do they have like a Washington Generals that follows them around? Or like,
I think there are other teams in, I'd say Southeast Asia. I mean, there are obviously Japan and Korea have massive baseball followings. So I need to do my research. Not to sound like a conspiracy theorist. I need to do my own research on what the schedule of the Mumbai Cobras looks like. And that's all the time we have. We went deep into the mailbag to cover races from New York, California. We talked about money. We talked about astronauts and how many astronauts end up being politicians. And we had help from our friend Leah. Thank you all for joining us. At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Please go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the biweekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for corporate and association PACs. If you like this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. Leave a comment. If you're on YouTube, click the thumbs up button. Also, subscribe there would be helpful. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Bill Nelson. We also want to thank our producers, Alan Tazinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and our associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us again next time.